So this is actually the first duet.
Yep.
The first duet recording on Shithead. So it's new for me too. It's a new format. I'm usually just one-on-one. So we'll see how this goes.
Okay.
So we're here today mostly to talk about your book, Man of Peace, and also your book, Isa,
Coming to Peace.
Coming to Peace. So we
Yeah,
got
so peace twice.
Peace is a peace squared. And before I start, just for those who cannot see the lovely and gracious Isa Gucciardi and the notorious B.O.B. Bob Thurman, we're here today at the Science and Non-Duality Conference, and Isa was very generous to put together this co-interview with her and Bob. So we're here to talk about Man of Peace and also to talk about Coming to Peace. But before we talk about those books, I just love to sort of reflect for a moment on the talk you both just did, or the workshop you both offered, which was called Shamans and Siddhas. And I know that some people on the podcast, or many people, will be familiar, at least in a kind of introductory way, of what shamanism is. But I'd love for you, Bob, to just talk about what is a siddha.
Right. So siddha comes from the verb sid, which means to achieve. And so we usually translate siddha as adept, and mahasiddha, great adept. Although in the old days, when people were first discovering Buddhist Tantrism and Indian spiritual history, they called them great sorcerers, because they did do sort of magical things, supposedly, although modern materialist scholars consider that mythical, right?
Yeah.
But the Buddhists don't, and they consider that they did these different things. And there's a famous set of 84 of them, who basically they are kind of like, the archetype of the tantric Buddha. Like in the Theravada, what I call individual vehicle, the highest sort of goal is to become an arhat, which is like a saint.
Yeah. And
then in the Mahayana, universal vehicle, the highest thing is to become a Buddha, and then a bodhisattva on the way, and then a number of Buddhas pretend to be bodhisattvas afterwards to sort of get close to people and encourage them and help them without seeming too far away, sort of thing. So then in Tantra, the one who attains Buddhahood in Tantra is called a great adept, or a mahasiddha. So it's like the third archetype. And in a way, what they are is, they are Buddha, they're considered to be Buddhas, but they manifest in a sort of more popular way. And some of them are weavers, some of them they're like anthropologists in a way. They go out with tribals in India, they go to Tibet, they went to Japan, to Indonesia. They're kind of, they are a little bit magicians, and they are teachers, but they go out and do it in a sort of ordinary way. Like Milarepa, for example, in Tibet was a siddha, and he was not a monk, and he was a layman, but he was a yogi, and he lived in the mountains all the time. And then there were some who were kings. There's a few kings. There's a few women. Not as many as there are not as many formally accepted as adepts, women, as there were. So in the set of 84, there's only 4 of them. But actually, each one of the 80 usually had woman teachers, because it's in the esoteric sort of level of things.
Yeah.
So that's a siddha. And of course, Buddha was the original siddha, but he has manifested the body that he manifested as a teacher was as a monk. And there are some siddha monks, but usually they leave being monks because they deal with women,
Yeah.
And they sometimes marry them, so they sometimes have a number of consorts and so forth. And they're an amazing bunch. They're quite an amazing bunch.
Yeah. Well, I recognized the word siddha from my knowledge of the Kashmir Shaivite tradition.
Right.
And that's sort of the Hindu side of Tantra, and of course Tibetan Buddhism, as you know, is the tantric form of Buddhism.
Right.
What is the connection historically there that you see between these two streams? Do you are they
Hindu and Buddhist? Oh, well, they're very similar. And for example, one of the most famous works among tantric adepts is Nagarjuna's 5 stages, it's called, Panchakrama, and of the perfection stage, that's sort of the very advanced yogic stages, where you do outer body, what they call magic body, I call magic body, some people call illusion body, and so on. And in those verses, they say at a certain advanced stage, Vishnu and Vajrasattva are same, Avalokiteshvara and Shiva are same. In other words, they don't make any religious discernment or discrimination in a way. And then there's a scholar, an Oxford scholar named Sanderson, who had some teachers in Kashmir nowadays, Shaiva, and he has a lot of theories about. He thinks the Buddhists copied the Shaivas, so he makes a big competitive thing out of it, and as his teachers did in India probably.
Yeah.
But there may be Buddhists who do that, and there are some traces that there is some kind of almost in a celestial plane that Vajradhara or Chakrasambhara and Shiva, they have a little, or some forms of Shiva, let's say, have a little something going on. But basically, it's not a problem. I feel, basically, that the Buddhists originate most of the tantric things, because Tantra involves shifting identities to a divine identity, and shifting the environment to a sort of celestial, mandalic environment. And if you're brought up as a Brahmin kid, and you're brought up therefore like a Catholic or something, you're afraid of God, Shiva or something, it's a little harder for you, I think, to go around saying, I am God, and I'm not going to meditate myself in the body of God.
You crazy.
Yeah. In other words, it's a little awe-inspiring, a little bit fearsome. Whereas Buddhists, although they don't deny the existence of gods, they relativize them, and they're not really scared of them. They like them, and they sometimes they tend to. There's some poems like the gods are a little proud because they're gods. They get a little like worked up, about how great they are. And there's a wonderful Buddhist poem, like it's a blessing poem. It says, "May you be blessed by the happiness of the gods when they're bowing to the Buddha, and they see reflected in his shining toenails their own crown diadems, their jeweled diadems. And when they see the sparkling reflection of their diadems in the Buddha's toenails, they feel a special bliss. And may that bliss be for your blessing." It's like a Sanskrit poem. So they have things like that. And the reason they feel like that with Buddha is that although gods are quite enlightened in one way, and they're really powerful and very beautiful and so forth, and although they can also be fearsome, the Buddha doesn't make a difference between himself and them. So when they meet a Buddha, they also have that feeling people do, like when they meet the Dalai Lama or some enlightened person, where they suddenly feel like instead of a person opposite you who's different from you, you a little bit feel enfolded in the consciousness of someone who experiences themselves as you at the same time as themselves, which is a completely different thing. So, instead of you're the God and this is versus another God or a lowly human or something, there's this field that you're in where you somehow feel that the other one is completely with you. And then your sense of pride, I'm better, kind of melts a little bit in that,
Wow. So now connecting this to sort of the theme of the workshop, and so I'm kind of curious because I arrived 15 minutes late, so perhaps I missed if this was remarked upon, but I was sort of curious what, and maybe Isa, you want to start, what the inspiration was behind bringing these two traditions together in a workshop, shamanism and Tibetan Buddhism.
You go ahead, ladies first. I mentioned you.
Well, it was actually Bob's idea.
Okay.
And
really?
Yeah.
Don't get me.
Yeah, you were like, we should do shamans and siddhas. I'm like,
right.
okay.
It's a great title. It really is.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I think, so maybe you should talk about the inspiration. I know.
Well, okay. And, the thing that I would say that, and, I don't know why. You do things you don't know why.
Yeah.
And when I met my original guru, or Lama, who was really the major turning point in my life, I told somebody that, he's my guru. And they said, well, why? He's just like a little man, in New Jersey, with a kimono on. He's like a Mongolian. He's not even Tibetan, etc. And I said, no, that's my guru. So I met a lot of other gurus. That's my guru. And they said, well, why? And I said, well, because in a weird way, he's not even there, I said. So I don't feel he has any agenda to use me in his agenda. He doesn't have any agenda for me. Therefore, he will be of help to me. I mean, I can trust him. And I didn't know what I was saying. I had no idea what I was saying. But many years later, I think I now have a good sense of why I felt that way. And it blurted it out. But I don't know. So maybe, I don't know my inspiration. But actually, after today, I had a bunch of breakthroughs in this event. You see, for Tibetan Buddhism, for example, other Buddhists used to say, that's so corrupt and that's weird, and because it's all shamanistic. And they use that as a negative
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
The literate religions are all negative, like witch doctors and
Yeah.
weird things, you know. They make a thing like that. And then there was some in Asia and in history between Buddhist missionaries, let's call them, although they're not really missionaries, but Buddhists who ended up teaching and serving people. And then sometimes they're shamans, like in Mongolia, they don't really like that. And there is one point of conflict or difference, which is Buddha doesn't like sacrificing animals.
Mm.
Even if you're not a vegetarian, it's a sin, it's a sad, you're taking a life, you're sorry about it, but you're used to eating that way. If you're a nomad, you have to have grazing animals. They can't have big gardens on a high step, you know. And but they don't like holy killing of animals.
Mm-hmm.
So some kinds of shamanism, they feel like, I once had a great friend who was a Yoruba high priest, and he said he's got to have that chicken and wring its neck and spray the blood around. So I said, well, that's where we can't really completely meet. But if you go to Ogun, you know, the god of iron in the Yoruba religion, and convince Ogun to become a vegan, then you can do all your rituals with some tomato juice, you know, and some like a chicken made out of flour, you know,
plastic
with sugar,
chicken.
like a marzipan chicken. You know. No problem, you know.
Yeah.
But because of sort of the form of the ritual, and you know that deity, they won't get cancer, they won't get any weird diseases from bad meat, because they'll be eating some healthy food.
Mm-hmm.
So the Buddhists did that in all these different cultures, you know, and they sort of vegetarianized the situation, you know. And a little bit, even though they're not necessarily a complete vegetarian. Some Chinese Buddhists are the best vegetarians, actually. Sri Lankans are not very good. They eat fish, a lot of fish, and Tibetans have to eat their yaks, you know.
Yeah.
At least, though, they don't like small animals, because they don't want to have a life a bite, you know, like oyster or something that they freak out about. They don't want that. So they eat a big animal they can eat for months, you know, and one sin will carry them for 3 months with the dried meat, you know, with prosciutto, you know, yak prosciutto. So anyway, so there was that one point of conflict. And now, shamanism, though, however, I feel, in this a Protestant, alienated, anti-nature culture, a psychotic culture that we have, industrial culture, not just Western anymore, it's worldwide, getting back to nature and to animal spirits and who are being species extinction going on like mad, you know, wrecking the planet, you know. So shamans are really great in that they can link back, you know, and they have, they had ayahuasca, you know, they have entheogenics or psychedelics, you know, and they give people vision quests, and they're marvelous. And in the ones around, like Isa, they are not really ringing any chicken, so that's not a problem. And Buddhism has that element, you know, Book of the Dead and this kind of thing, that it's aware of the invisible levels and demons and deities and angels and demons and things like that, and gods. Even Buddhism is not against gods. There's a completely wrong idea that Buddhists are atheists. It's absolutely not. They just don't think there's one creator. You know, they don't monotheistic one, but they think there are gods. Brahma's talking to Buddha all the time. They give him a bath when he's a baby. Brahma and Indra, you know.
Well, one of my favorite lines you said in the workshop was, "Gods are people too." I liked that.
It's what?
Gods are people
Oh yeah,
too.
they are. They are. So I think that it's really great to relate, and I'll tell a story. I didn't tell you this yet, but Alberto Villoldo told me a story about how he met a famous Zen guy who used to be here in California and had a little scandal, but he's a nice guy. Dick Baker, a guy called Richard Baker, who was founded all the San Francisco Zen Center pretty much.
Oh, wow.
He was the first successor of the Japanese guy, and he built up their whole system. Then there was a scandal, and he went off.
Always a scandal.
But anyway, he met Alberto, and then they had something, and then he told Alberto, said, "Oh, you know, a lot of spirits, something like they were in Japan or something," and then he said. The Zen guy said, "But we don't deal with those spirits, you know. We don't. If we run into a spirit in meditation, we don't pay no attention to this. That's useless, ridiculous, and so on." Then apparently he went down and visited Alberto in Peru, and they took ayahuasca and some other cactus, you know, like something.
San Pedro.
And then they were in Machu Picchu, and then
Saw a lot of spirits there.
and then Baker said, "Oh, there's a lot of spirits around here." And then he was holding Alberto's hand like this. And then Alberto told me, he said a little bit naughtily, he said, "Oh, we don't really pay attention to spirits." That's great. So that's like the Buddhist shaman thing, sort of not quite a meeting, but they were friends, so it was like a meeting.
Yeah.
But on the theoretical level, the journey, dealing with your own unconscious, the issues of death, and dealing with deceased people, ancestors. Although Buddhists don't worship ancestors, they think ancestors are reborn and they're around them, and so they have a different attitude than some people do. But the whole area, I think, is very useful to make relationships.
Yeah.
And it may well be of help in Asia, where there's a residue of the kind of struggles in Mongolia, for example. Nowadays, there's a rekindled kind of shaman
Right.
Buddhist struggle a little
Right.
bit because of the animal sacrifice, pretty
Right.
much, and also just competing for clients, and competing for supporters, And so it might be nice to be more we understand that, and then I want to learn from the shaman thing, and I think they might find things useful about the Buddhist knowledge of the subtle body and life and death and Book of the Dead, this kind of thing.
Yeah, it seems like a fruitful intersection, and I appreciate you mentioning how it really is encouraging Buddhists to reconnect to the earth, because I feel like in my own observation, a lot of times East Asian philosophies by Westerners get appropriated in kind of a renunciant way.
Oh, yeah,
And so
sure.
they encourage that desire to escape and not connect. And there's a lot of yogis and a lot of people who are practicing Buddhists who I feel like don't have, it's not embedded in those traditions to cultivate a relationship to the earth,
That's right.
at least as apparently. So
Right.
it is, I think it's a beautiful thing to bring them together in the way that you guys have done. So Isa, I wanted to ask you a question actually about, you took us on the shamanic journey, which was really beautiful. It was the first time I've ever done that.
Oh,
and,
really? Oh, cool.
Yeah,
I enjoyed it,
I
too.
found myself. I went to the Puget Sound where I grew up, and a bear was my guide. But I wanted to be in
Oh.
the water, so eventually that bear became a fish bear. So there you go. But there was a person that asked a question that I thought was really interesting, the way you answered it, and it was a good question, and so I just want to re-ask it here. And that question was, how do you know what's real versus what's imagined in the context of the shamanic journey? And I thought your reflection on that was really interesting. So do you want to rehash that a little bit for us?
Sure. Well, I think that, first of all, I mean, I can expand upon that a little bit. I think that one of the things that happens in our educational system is that people are not really taught to trust their own experience. There's a lot of emphasis on learning. When you're learning, you're trying to get to a place where you can share a consensus idea about something, and there's an external authority that says this is the way things are, and these are the exercises that you do in order to understand that this is the way things are. And on the one hand, I think we really need to have a consensus reality, because this is a pretty crazy, wild place,
Yeah.
right? And having a consensus reality is really helpful to help organize things and to help bring forward, some kind of cooperation. But that there's been a real loss, especially now with the loss of the arts and music and, the philosophy as part of the formation of young people, where there's this inner inquiry that is kind of lost. And so when people are asked to look inward and to try to understand what is arising from within them, they hesitate because, first of all, they're not used to doing that, and they're used to having some kind of external approval saying this is right or this is wrong. And so one of the things that happens is that they're like, okay, I don't know if this is right. I need an external authority to tell me this is right. And also one of the things that happens is because the education system is bereft of the imaginal world. I mean, there's no art classes anymore
Yeah.
in middle school, and very little in preschool and elementary school compared to what there was. And so there's just, this, Bob talks a lot about this materialist scientific view
Yeah.
that's kind of deadening to the world. And in that view, which is the dominant view, the dominant theology of the time, imagination is something that is an anathema.
Yeah.
And so people, when they hear about imagination, it's just imagination. It's not like, imagination, imagine
Yeah.
Imagine where the world could go, right?
Mhm.
So in the answer that I gave in class today, I was trying to help the person understand is that the imagination is a very, very powerful vehicle for transcending what is.
Mhm.
And what I said in class was, everything in the room was imagined by someone before it came into being. I mean, things don't come into being unless they're imagined, right?
Yeah.
And so the human imagination is actually this very powerful tool, which acts as a bridge in the shamanic journey into the realm of the guides. And I gave that example of my client who had an experience where she was sure she was imagining things, and then the guide performed a particular act to show her that she could not be imagining it, right?
Mhm.
And so I always say to people, if it's okay, if it's fine, think you're imagining it. Imagine how wonderful your imagination is. Make friends with it. Develop an internal guide through your allowing yourself to have your imaginal sphere, and then step into this numinous world of these helping spirits through the journey, and allow them to teach you and allow them to help you establish a relationship where you understand and trust yourself again. And this, for me, I have to say, it's the most wonderful thing for me to be able to help people have this trust be reborn in them.
Yeah.
Because people are really lost, and they keep looking to these external orthodoxies that have their own agenda. And the wonderful thing about working with the shamanic journey in the way we do in applied shamanism is that people are able to find their own path to spirit through the iconography of the natural world, which is not owned by any particular orthodoxy.
Yeah.
So they can find themselves on their path where they are. And I have to add a caveat here, because in applied shamanism, it's a little bit different than traditional shamanic practice. Because traditional shamanic practice doesn't have this idea of self-evolution or the possibility of becoming more enlightened. And in general, in traditional practice, the journey is used to establish relationship with helping spirits who then help you heal or help you perform certain processes such as rituals or divination or helping the spirits of the dead. And those are all incredibly important and powerful processes. But the idea that you are going to evolve in a particular direction toward an enlightened state doesn't exist in traditional shamanic practice.
Mm-hmm.
But in applied shamanism, because of which is the form of shamanism that I teach and that I've developed, because of my years of Buddhist study, I've really adapted the shamanic journey into a process not unlike the more rigorous, I think, Vipassana types of meditations, where you are taking an issue, you're looking at it, you're asking a question, you're waiting for an answer, you're using your one-pointed focus to kind of drill into a karmic knot, and allowing the meditative space to open it for you. Now, the reason that I like working with the journey rather than just that straight ahead Vipassana, although I do work that way all the time myself and I do teach that, but I like working with the journey, again, because of this sense of emptiness or the sense of personal isolation that people have. Their inner lives are, the word I hear all the time is bereft. It's like their inner world is really bereft of any kind of meaning, and they don't have any handholds. And when you're working with the guides in the shamanic journey in the way that we do with applied shamanism, you have an internal anchor that helps you look at these really kind of karmic knots that are difficult for people to look at. People feel like they have an internal support. They're encouraged and they're supported as they try to move into these more difficult aspects of their experience. And so it's not unlike in Tibetan Buddhism, where you have for instance, the medicine Buddha that might come to someone who's sick, and they might pray to the medicine Buddha, do devotional practices, maybe do a deity meditation where they are embodying the field, stepping into the field of the medicine Buddha, and allowing the medicine Buddha to give them a cure, to give them insight about where they might go with their disease, right? So there's an intersection there which is very, very key and profound.
Yeah.
And it's that is where shamans and siddhas meets, really, in these amazing iconography of the Buddhist Tibetan Buddhist deities. It's very similar the way in which they can be worked with.
Yeah, I'm really glad you ended on right there, because that sort of segues into my next question. But I just want to go back and say that I appreciate the thoughts on imagination, because I feel like too often imagination gets conflated with fantasy, and so imagination ends on the other. It's it's a binary, an arbitrary binary between imagination and reality. And what you're really inviting us to reflect on is how imagination actually is sort of the precursor to a different manifestation of reality. So it's not on the other side. It's not this sort of like dualism, so to speak.
Can I offer a further thought there? Because I think that when imagination is used for fantasy, it's often used to escape.
Yeah.
And that's the way what most people are using it. Most people are trying to escape.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I actually don't like fantasy. I know, Bob, you love science fiction and fantasy novels. I can't stand it. It's like I find it. I get impatient with it because I feel like it's not real. You don't
like stories about sorcerers, or?
I like practices with sorcerers.
Yeah.
I mean, I like the actual experience of it, and I like to stay close. I like to use the imagination or that as a bridge to go closer to the self, not away from the self. And I know ultimately it's all the same place. It can all wind up in the same place. But I really have an issue with people going too far into fantasy.
Sure.
It's really, and this is why, like, for instance, a lot of Zen practitioners don't like Tibetan Buddhism, because they're afraid they're going to go too far into this delusion, right?
Yeah.
And people do go into delusion. But I always say, imbalance is grounding. Pathology is grounding. If you stay close to the problem at hand and use the tools that we work with in applied shamanism with the idea that you are addressing an issue that is problematic, you are not ever going to go into fantasy. You're always going to stay in the imaginal realm that can provide insight and understanding, which is the realm of Tantra.
Yeah.
Right? Because this is you're very close up against the elemental energies that are composing the karmic knots that you're dealing with, right? And you have to imagine that you can enter into them and work with them in the way that we do in order to be able to work with the way that they do. So this idea of staying close to the issue at hand. I'm actually like super serious. Like I goof around but I am like, my advanced students will tell you, I'm just like, I turn into this kind of general. It's like, okay, all right, what are we doing here? Let's, like, stop goofing around. Don't bang the drum unless you're going to be journeying. Like
people need that. Yeah. I need a little of that sometimes.
Yeah.
So to go back then about, because one of the questions that I had, and then we'll move into conversation about the book, is that I noticed a correlation between the inner guide of shamanism and the kind of the iconography of Tara and the medicine Buddha. But what I found sort of interesting as a difference is that in the shamanic journey there is a kind of, you're invited to, allow the image to kind of spontaneously arise for you, and it might be very different. It's infinitely variable. Mine was a fish bear. Someone else's might be, in your book you write about someone who had a pillar of light that was had a quality of being I can't even remember, strong or something. So it's so variable. It doesn't even have to be an animal. Whereas with Tibetan Buddhism, there's iconography that's set for you. So I'm curious about what's the status or what's the significance of that difference between inviting that imagery to kind of spontaneously form in your own experience versus having a kind of set iconography that you're using.
Do you want me to
Bob,
take
do you
that?
want to?
Well, It's like in the case of Jung, you know.
Mm.
Carl Jung has these mandalas, and then the idea is that and the Western psychology idea is that you want to let your unconscious express itself to you.
Yeah.
And so you make your mandala, and then you can analyze that, and you can see your unconscious, because the idea is that you're otherwise not going to know, because your unconscious is, in principle, remains unconscious. Whereas I think the Buddhist psychology, because of the being in the multi-life framework as an automatic consensual reality, your goal as a human being is to become conscious of your unconscious.
Yeah.
And to reshape the energies of the unconscious. And you don't need to, in a way, and they don't need to talk to you as fish bears. You know, in other words, you need to find them, you need to harness that fish bear, and then maybe you want to harness it, you need to saddle it and bridle it, and use it for some purpose, you know, and sort of relate to it in a way where you go somewhere with it in a transformative way.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but in a way they've developed their different forms by thousands of years of people letting their mind play free. I think one thing I wanted to say about imagination in relation to what Isa was talking about, and that is that according to Buddhist very highly technical psychology and epistemology, we are imagining the world all the time.
Yeah.
And our routine conceptualization is sort of routinized imagination around a chair. Like that chair is not presenting itself out of its own chairness. I'm imagining a chair, and I fit my image of a chair over some visual, optical, atomic data going to the neurons in my brain through the optic nerve and so on. And I'm organizing, you know, and like people when they do vision quests or things and they start hallucinating, it's because something changes their ability to immediately fit everything they experience into some preconceived idea, which is a routinized or fixated imagination that comes through the culture and whatever you've learned, you know. And this is where emptiness is a really big and important thing. You know, voidness, emptiness, you know, the critical negational meditations of the Buddhist scientists, because that's how you erode the grip of your conceptualization over your instinctual or your sort of immediate experience. But it isn't to just eliminate them. There's another vague misunderstanding of Buddhism that the whole thing is to not imagine anything and not have any concepts, and your mind just is like blah, and that's supposed to be enlightenment, but that actually isn't the case. It's rather to reshape those images and then use them in a structured way. So I think the tantric thing has a little bit of free play in it, but the idea is that you want to shape the erotic energy, the aggressive energy, and you want to put on a kind of ideal suit or uniform, like a Michelin Man suit they put when they do spacewalks, or their body would explode. So if you go down and do spacewalks in the space of your unconscious, then you should clothe yourself in a dream or subtle body that is able to deal with Thanatos, you know, the god of death, or Eros, you know, the god of erotics, you know, and so it's really, Western people don't like it, but they're backward in this sort of thing. You know, and the Buddhists have centuries of, you know, they had the 10,000 Freuds and Jungs and Reichs way back in India and Tibet a long time ago, you know. Yeah. And this is kind of codified in a way that's very useful, and don't have to reinvent the wheel, you know. Just because it shows that the Western people are not that superior as they like to think they are. You know?
They certainly aren't.
You know?
Well, in terms of, speaking of reshaping images, there's a lot of images in your new book.
Oh, right. Oh, good.
So we'll mention Man of Peace, and we're here on audio with the podcast, but those of you who are watching, this is Bob's new book, and it's a graphic novel of the life story of the Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Now, I assume you didn't make these portraits.
No, we had a team of 5 artists, and then 2 other writers working together with me, and an originator, a lady who died, who was kind of the originator of the Lama. She's the 8th person.
Okay.
Or what? 9th person maybe, who wanted her husband, who was one of my co-writers, to push this project along.
Yeah, what was the inspiration behind making, you're an academic, you spent many years writing very academic texts. This is obviously
Right.
very different in spirit from those
Right.
from those books. So what
Right.
inspired you to be a part
Well,
of
it's
this?
been, the knowledge of what His Holiness did is based on my study of the Dalai Lama.
Yeah, of course.
And along my long 54-year friendship with him, and being in many of the incidents with him, actually, but not all of them, but quite a few. And but the inspiration of the lady who the Dalai Lama was kind to and shared his physician, extending her lifespan for about 2 or 3 years, having been given a stage 4 thing, and some time back in the 80s, I think. Hers was that she wanted it like this, so young people would know the story of the Dalai Lama. And then her husband brought it to me, but he's not a writer, and he's a book designer sort of person, but he wanted to see it done. So then I saw it, I thought it was a great idea. And actually, I didn't even realize it, but one of the people I interviewed with in my sort of book tour said, well, you had just written a book called Why the Dalai Lama Matters, about the Dalai Lama and his importance in world politics and world history at this time, and what that importance is, which indeed I had. And so it's natural that your next step, you would want to see a version of his life which he would never present himself. Because he wouldn't present himself in a heroic,
Right.
archetypal. Like I once said when he wrote another book earlier that I liked a lot, called Ethics for the New Millennium, which I really liked because he called in there a few years after I wrote that book called Inner Revolution, showing the socially transformative aspect of Buddhism, which I think had been very much neglected by Buddhists.
Yeah.
And he wanted to call for an ethical revolution. So I had called for a spiritual and inner revolution, mental, psychic revolution. He called for an ethical one. So I saw him and I said, okay, now you're ready to be a prophet? I said, that's really great for stepping into the role of being a prophet, speaking truth to power. He says, no. No, I don't want to do that. No, he didn't. He's just calling for people to be more ethical. So, and he's thinking maybe also prophet in English means predicting the future.
Ah, okay.
Partly, I think.
Yeah.
Linguistic mixed up partly. And partly he just didn't want to be presenting himself as taking a powerful position in the nature of the way humans should be conducting life on this planet now. But he actually occupies such a powerful position. Indeed, he does.
Yeah.
And actually, unlike Gandhi and King, he didn't get shot yet. And I think he won't. And but he's occupying a position like that, speaking truth to power. He says no to, and actually he and I were blocked. I won't say who, but we had all the budget, we had the director, we had a contract, and he authorized me. We were going to do a special, Inconvenient Truth type of documentary conference, in which we were going to attack basically the arms industry. And there's that Swedish institute that tracks all the arms dealers. And there is this sick thing in the world today where 5 veto power wielding nations in the United Nations, supposed to be a world peace organization, right? They are the biggest arms dealers on the planet, those 5, China, Russia, US, France, and Britain. And they're massively producing, I mean, there are other people, Czechoslovakia, even Sweden produces arms. But it's a horrible industry. And, they might be having riots in some tribal thing in South Sudan, but they wouldn't be able to exterminate whole villages and everything, but they have AK-47s and just happy to sell them to them, all the arms dealers. So we were going to do a movie like that. And then some people, I don't say who, but they, oh no, His Holiness shouldn't come out and speak out when these governments that are arms dealers, one has to appeal that they finally give Tibet a break, so you don't want to go out and condemn that. They said he was ready to go with me.
Yeah.
And do that, like a Al Gore thing on the environment. We're going to do it with the arms trade, which is a terrible trade.
Wait, I'm confused how it connects to Tibet. How calling out those governments who are doing the arms dealing would negatively affect Tibet.
Those people who don't realize that Tibet will be free, what you could call a 60, whether it's politically under someone's technical paper sovereignty or what, but it's free on the ground in their own way of controlling their life and their environment and their dharma, And it will not be free, just like Standing Rock will not be there preserving the water system until the world system changes.
Yeah, of course.
within the current nation state, armed to the teeth, petrochemical culture that the planet is gripped by, those places just can't be free. And they're hoping somehow by compromising and not calling them out, and then one of them will have pity on them and save them. But that's not the case. That's why, and Dalai Lama he doesn't want to get too far out from those people, but he was ready to go for it anyway. And he has said things like publicly, like generals and these military things, like referring to Iraq or something, when they have their wars, they're just taking human bodies, like throwing logs on a fire. They just don't mind. Oh yeah, we'll lose 100,000. And he doesn't even know the history of World War One. And I didn't actually know one thing, and I bet you don't. When they would charge out of their trenches to get 100 meters of progress in the World War One, when they killed 30 million, 40 million people at that time with a much lesser population on the planet, the generals knew that the first 7 rows of soldiers going out were just machine gun bullet absorbers.
Oh my God.
It was only the 8th row that could then jump into the trench and start going
The
hand
7
in hand.
was absolutely 100% going to die. The first 7 rows.
Totally. No question. They were just going to absorb bullets until they ran low on ammunition, and then the 8th could maybe jump into the trench from both sides. So they're the generals, and then there are stories, if you read really the history, where some general, or we'll say colonel, will say to an adjutant, "Go find me a captain, I want to shoot him." Well, they say, "Well, nobody did any treason lately." "No, I don't care, I want to shoot one. Execute one for being a little soft on the ground troops," because they had to keep them moving. They had to exercise this kind of total brutality, completely inconsiderate of the life of supposedly their own side. So the Dalai Lama has said, these are like people who just throw lives on a fire, like you throw a log on a fire. So he's ready to call out to the world, because I think he understands, but he doesn't want to call them out in the sense of, now we'll come get you with our troops. He wants to call them out in the sense that now you have to stop and we have to talk.
Yeah.
We have to see what is it you need, because what you don't need is another war with anybody, and you need to dialogue. And we can't have 21st century. He's a man of peace. He's a man with a message that 21st century cannot be like a century of bloodshed, like a World War century of the 20th century, right? Which was one long war. 150 wars going on even in the 90s. Here and there, semi-proxy, non-proxy, and in a way, it's all proxy because why? It's selling weapons for these huge industries that dominate these countries, and so that's their market. And to them, it's a great value-adding market because you use up the bomb and then they have to make another one. Never mind that people are like being the victims of these bombs, right? And then maybe I'm sure there's something in their mind like, there's too many people. Well, we can get rid of lots of them. Never mind. They feel that way, and that's not human being. That's not human way of living. So Dalai Lama's call to the world is like that. But he doesn't want to present himself like that, and then sometimes the people who feel he's theirs, they get a little scared if he's presented it in sort of too powerful a way.
Yeah.
But Man of Peace shows his life as a real nonviolent hero in the midst of genocide, and not reacting to genocide with hatred and bitterness and wish for vengeance, and then trying to help others not do it to each other. For example, it shows here how he accepted the suggestion from Tutu and others that they go to Iraq before the Bush and Cheney, I should call it the Cheney invasion, Cheney-Rumsfeld invasion, and talk to Saddam Hussein and make it impossible for the excuse that Cheney used by having Saddam Hussein really say, "No, I don't have nukes," and etc. He did kind of say that, but not really, because he was scared of the Iranians and others. He wanted to pretend he did have something, Saddam Hussein. But that group would have gone and tried to make it like the Swedish guy who was running the arms inspector, who said, "No, they don't have it. They don't." But still, they made Powell lie in the UN, and then they got their excuse, and they went in there, and we're still seeing the damage from that.
Yeah.
That's the creation of. They can't blame Obama for ISIS. They did it. They wrecked the whole place, and it's still going on. And just now, we have betrayed for the 19th time since colonials have been wrecking the Middle East. We just betrayed the Kurds, who were our only allies and who were the only ones trying to be cool. And we just betrayed them to the Shiites. who are supposedly our enemies because of the nuclear deal. I mean, it's just nutty what they're doing. And we're in a state, I take great heart, actually, personally, in the total incompetence of all these leaders.
You take heart in that incompetence.
Because
everything's gonna break down.
nobody in their countries thinks they're doing a good job.
Yeah.
It's just the democracies are not working.
Yeah.
They're corrupted by money in our country where we
Yeah.
have we should have good mechanisms to do it, but it's completely corrupted by money, right up to the Supreme Court, who are irrational.
Yeah.
They're not rational judges. They're irrational corporate shills.
Yeah.
Those people,
Yeah.
and most of them, and the majority, and so. That's for the man of peace. And I've had people who had read the Dalai Lama's autobiographies express pleasure and delight to me that, they didn't quite read all of it, because it's just words on a page. You know how nobody can read anything anymore too easily because some visual stimulation has to be there, right, because of all our machineries. And which are, I think, basically all good, although a little worry about the young being too much onto them.
Yeah, totally.
But they're really young. But they're all good. And they said, well, here, because of the pictures, and because it could go through it, they got through all the aspects of his life, and then they saw his spiritual development. But they saw it in the context of him not reacting to really harsh physical experiences for himself and his people.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, a kind of genocide has been going on there because of the foolishness of the rulers, not the regular Chinese people. They're no more bad or good than any other people. They're just the same. The whole fake thing that Sinologists will tell you that, Chinese are special, they can't lose face. Chinese think differently. They're all different. That's a bunch of nonsense. Chinese like to have a party. They like to have fun, like everybody else. They're no more afraid of losing face than some sort of politician who has a tantrum because he's caught, like
pants down.
messing around, having an abortion with his mistress, even though he's a big pro-life.
Yeah.
They're losing face and they all freak out, So they're no different, Chinese.
Yeah.
And actually, big thing in this century is the white friendship with the Chinese people, including the Russians on our side of that, and not having like a world war between the Euro people and the yellow people is the end of the planet.
Yeah.
We can't have that. And who is the better bridge between those two people than His Holiness the Dalai Lama? And I think Xi Jinping, I still insist, everybody says Xi Jinping failed, Xi Jinping is so bad, Xi Jinping is so powerful, and they're going on and on about it. He is going to turn around, and the Dalai Lama and he are going to be friends, and the Dalai Lama will be, instead of the pariah that they try to chase around the planet and act like he's a bad guy when everybody knows he's the nicest guy. Instead, he will be their goodwill ambassador.
Mm.
And because they want to make it, their economy has gone where they can't just produce all the stuff there. They ruined their own environment to do that. They have lots of money. They want to have a big global market, and they want to deal with that.
Yeah.
And anybody who leaves the global market, I have an evil joke. The Brexit people, the Bannon people who want to do white nationalism or any kind of nationalism, when the whole of Eurasia is all woven together with beautiful bullet trains, and you could go Paris to Beijing and drink champagne all the way and have fun, and the people along the road will have jobs and it'll be fine. There won't be any desperate poverty here and there. And when that happens, people who like to leave the planet on the basis of some isolationist white nationalism or yellow, any kind of nationalism, they can open laundry chains and they can price everybody's shirts. And they can do a British version of no ticky, no washi. Steve Bannon can out there, and the alt-right can do a little pressing.
I would love to see Steve Bannon doing some pressing of laundry.
It's an evil joke. I shouldn't say mean things. I hope he'll convert and he'll be very happy. He'll start a fashion industry for the North Koreans. I really do hope so. But my point is, the Dalai Lama stands for the hopefulness of this planet.
Yeah.
We're all operating under this BS that it's a crappy planet, badly designed. God was really incompetent, lying around somewhere, like I don't know what, like making women out of ribs and things, like really. And then he didn't make a nice planet, so people can't enjoy each other, and they can't. It's not enough for everybody, so we have to see to it that lots of people who we don't like are killed off.
Mm-hmm.
And animals, we don't need them. It's like Mao, killed all the birds and all the mice and all everything and all the pets. They ate all the pets, because he didn't want to give them a little piece of grain or some piece of wood. Then meanwhile they had insect explosions, and then Chinese people got all paranoid because there's nobody they could pet. They had no canary to sing to them. They ate them all the dogs. Ridiculous. There's plenty here. If we share, we live nicely. Nobody needs many billions. Maybe we cut off at $1 billion, then they could have 100% tax over $1 billion. $1 billion should be cool. You could be able to buy enough Teslas for $1 billion. It'd be just cool enough. And so the point is, the Dalai Lama represents a vision that this is a beautiful planet and there's enough for everybody. Population control, you don't have to bomb them. All you have to do is educate the women. And then they'll tell the guys, take a freaking hike and go play poker. I'm not having no more kids. Or you babysit them. You have them in your belly. I've had enough. 1 is enough. 2 is enough. And then population goes zoop down like in a generation. So, it's very manageable if people would use their common sense and their good hearts. And every human being has a good heart. It's a real effort to become a mass murderer. You have to really wall yourself off, take a lot of drugs, drink alcohol. Like Stalin, you have to slaughter and take drugs and do all weird stuff. Maybe even rubbing
alcohol too.
Yeah, maybe drink any kind of thing. Because basically human beings they have fun being nice, like petting each other and talking to each other. They don't want to sit there stabbing people. It's tiresome. Yeah. It makes your arms sore. It's ridiculous. and we're not built for that.
No.
And so he is the one guy who insists on that, My common human religion is kindness.
Yeah.
And so we have finally shown him in his global thing. And I was very worried he would be upset because, like I said, I would say, you're going to be a prophet now? He says, no. He gets me this. And so, but I'm showing him like that. And that's the way he is. I'm confident.
Yeah.
And I'm also confident he will prevail in his lifetime. I'm sure. I really am. And, I'll go down the sink under the bridge being sure, but I will do it because it's just not possible anymore. The infrastructure can't take it.
Yeah.
We can't have another world war,
Yeah.
Like that's a great cartoon that they make I saw it somewhere. Putin and Trump bareback on a horse, looking like the two gay guys that they are. And they're like, Trump has lost a little weight, I think, to get there. And they're like galloping on some horse. That's perfect. And they could have Kim Jong-un like in front. He could be the coxswain. He's a little guy.
Yeah.
He could be like, okay, guys, let's get going. No problem.
Yeah.
And they could have some fun. Kim Jong-un, he can join the village people and sing and dance. Korean soap operas are awesome. You know that he kidnapped the best director and actress and had them in prison for 3 years in North Korea, and then gave them huge budget and make movies for him, and then they escaped.
No way.
Yeah, because he was jealous of the great South Korean Namgang, whatever it's called. South Korean. The South Koreans make all the Downton Abbeys of Asia. Chinese and Japanese love them.
Oh
Thai people watch them like mad. It's like Downton Abbey for all Asian people in sort of Asian dress and costume, both the classical and modern.
And Kim Jong-un,
he wants to get into that business. That's what he really wants. He doesn't want to sit there blowing up rockets and things. He's got
some good television.
He's probably got
his country.
He's probably gotten a little desensitized. So he slaughtered a bunch of people lately.
Yeah.
But human beings are incredibly malleable.
Yeah.
The good ones can get really bad really quickly. The bad ones can get really good really quickly. Mm-hmm. And it all has to do with culture and education and a feeling of security, and a little teaching.
Yeah.
A little self-control, a little meditation.
Yeah. I appreciate that message of hopefulness.
Yes.
Yeah. So now let's move into talk a little bit about Isa's book, which is
Coming to Peace.
So
I like
Man
that.
of Peace.
I have to admit, I get at my age, a slight sexual connotation about Sorry,
God,
Isa.
I never even thought of that.
Sorry,
Oh,
Isa.
no.
Oh my God.
Sorry, but it's perfectly all right. Don't worry about it.
That's great.
It's perfectly all right. That's quite
All right.
correct.
I mean, if peace is orgasmic, anyway.
There you go.
You know?
That's what it's all about.
Oh my goodness.
Death is orgasmic.
Yeah.
Peace
That's what
is
I
orgasmic.
hear.
Wilhelm Reich, the great Wilhelm Reich,
Yeah.
the function of the
Yeah.
orgasm. And then his notion of militarism relates to the emotional plague and the neuromuscular armoring, where people like Weinstein, like Trump, like these crazy people, their problem is they don't feel internal streaming. They're orgasmically impotent. And they never satisfied. Then they're grabbing more things because no one of them gets them off, really, truly off. I mean, they get a kind of weird sadistic off, but they don't really get off because they can't. They're walled off on their inner streaming.
So Trump is sexually frustrated, and that's the cause of his
Totally.
streaming.
Can't you see that?
Yeah, I can see.
And his wife can definitely see it. Did you watch them dance?
Yeah,
See where she was?
yeah.
He was like, she was like this.
Yeah.
You could see the body language. Did you see it? I saw it on the
Yeah,
inauguration night.
Yeah, yeah.
Like this. That means he
All right.
doesn't really get it from there, you see, because it's not in himself, the capability. He has it. He needs to come to Menla, and he needs to have some Korean
Oh gosh.
acupressure and Reichian rolfing and a few needles stuck here and there, and then be held in such a way that he can let himself feel melting without fear,
Yeah.
which is very hard for him, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
And
He
it's
needs,
very hard for
he
him.
needs the sacred stream. Really,
What?
that's he needs. The sacred stream, which now has a
There
totally
you
different
go.
Yeah,
resonance.
he needs the teachings
Oh,
of the
sacred stream, oh Ben. Sorry. I didn't mean to out your book, but it's a great book. It's a great idea. I like it very much.
It's beautiful, and it goes through your method of depth hypnosis. And one thing that I really enjoyed about it, in the portions that I read, was the transcriptions of some of the interactions or some of the the circles, and so. Do you want to reflect a little bit about?
Tell us about it.
Tell us about the book.
Well, it's about an orgasm.
That lasted a really long time.
Very good. But inner one,
An inner one.
in the heart chakra, in the
Right.
throat chakra.
That's right, and you're
Not just
coming to
What they
peace.
call, what Freud, not what Freud would call genitally organized.
Right. there you go.
Exclusively.
Right.
Okay,
there
good.
You go. Okay. It's also a method of conflict resolution. And the coming to peace is predicated on this method of conflict resolution that you actually find again in many shamanic cultures. In particular, we go into examining Ubuntu, which is the method of conflict resolution that's found throughout southern Africa.
That's right.
And Ho'oponopono, which is a method of resolution for conflict and healing that you find throughout the Pacific. And the process of the caucus that the Iroquois League used, and which Benjamin Franklin and George Washington used as a model for understanding the relationship between states' rights and the federal government. And
Which they learned from the Iroquois Confederation.
that's right, which they learned from the Iroquois Confederation, right? And the caucus process there, the Ho'oponopono and the Ubuntu, all share this idea that what brings peace is when you create the proper container for everyone who's involved in conflict to be able to speak their understanding of what the roots of the conflict are, where there's no interrupting, where their our hierarchies are dissolved because
yeah.
everyone has an equal voice, and where mutual respect and understanding that everyone wants to be happy, actually, and that these are the fundamental approach that people bring, the fundamental approach that is brought to the coming to peace process, and also the participation of inner wisdom, where people are encouraged to connect with the part of themselves that knows their own truth, so that they have an anchor internally as they are speaking about the external conflict.
Yeah.
And in the book, we give lots of examples about how, even something that I've just described taking place over 45 minutes, resolving years-long conflict between people, when people realize that they actually have the same interest. And there's a process of a kind of a time out, if people are not able to have mutual respect, or if they're interrupting, or if there's some way in which they're not participating in an honest way, they are then set to connect with this inner wisdom again, so that they can find their highest self to be able to come back to the conflict resolution process. So
I'm sorry, I meant to interrupt, but that's a marvelous compliment to His Holiness's call that this century all conflicts have to be solved by dialogue, and the one thing is no violence, no military, but dialogue. So there, you're providing actual method and technology of successful dialogue. That's just my friend.
Thank you.
It fits with His Holiness.
No, it
very,
totally
very
fits. Totally fits. And another thing that fits with His Holiness, His Holiness has said this phrase in different ways many times, which is that inner conflict drives external conflict.
Yeah.
He says you cannot have external peace unless you have inner peace.
World peace through
Right.
inner peace. That's the
Right.
slogan.
And so this is also fundamental to the coming to peace process. And we actually have the external process looks like people sitting in a circle, a talking stick or a talking stone being passed. The mediator holds a backseat role. Everyone is responding to other people's statements about their experience, and they're stating their own experience until there's a resolution. And there is always a resolution. It just takes a little time. But one of the other processes of coming to peace is inner coming to peace, wherein there is a way to work in an altered state of awareness to identify parts of the self that are in conflict. And there's a process of reifying those parts through a lot of the work that we were doing with the shamanic journey, and that same kind of thing, reifying energies within the self, and then having those parts of the self have a dialogue in the same way, with the same concept of mutual respect, no interrupting, telling the truth. And again, this internal circle of a container for peace is created within the individual, within a session of inner coming to peace. And in the book, I give this example of this family who had a stepfather who was trying to make up for the fact that the biological father was not showing up for the children. And he was driving himself to take more and more responsibility and getting more and more aggressive with everyone around him, when he realized that his efforts to take responsibility and try to make things better for the children wasn't working. And so then he was actually turning on himself. And he was angry with himself because he was not able to take the responsibility properly or execute on the responsibility that he felt he needed to. So in the book, we do the coming to peace externally in the work with the family, where both the stepdaughter and the stepfather realize that they're taking out their anger at the biological father on each other, which was profound. And then there's an inner coming to peace process that's demonstrated through two parts of the self within him, where he was trying to resolve his anger and his aggression. And he found one part that was taking too much responsibility, and another part that was angry at that process of taking too much responsibility. And they had a dialogue to where they could get to having a new relationship to responsibility for both of them. And that completely changed, like that breakthrough that we had in the outer coming to peace session was huge. But then he was able to sustain that peace by resolving the conflict between the two inner parts that were driving him to be aggressive because of his upsetness with himself at not taking responsibility properly. Right? So that's what coming to peace is about, and it certainly serves the purposes of His Holiness. I know, Bob, every breath you take is to serve His Holiness, and I feel that way too. I really feel that way. I think both of us are really dedicated to doing everything we can to bring forward His Holiness's agenda, and agenda is a little bit of a charged word, but because it has attachment. But His Holiness's teachings,
Mhm.
where, and the inner coming to peace process and the external coming to peace process are definitely in alignment with that.
Mhm.
And I think that people reading that book will understand more about what brings peace.
Yeah.
And one of the messages in that book it's actually what I wanted the subtitle of the book to be, which is finding peace in the heart of conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mhm.
I think His Holiness finds peace in the heart of conflict, and he shows the path to that.
Mhm.
And I think that this book that Bob has written, I think is invaluable, because I think the woman who was the inspiration for it was absolutely right. Young people will pay attention to this, and they will see there is an alternative to war, and they will see that it is possible to have the courage to face down the forces of aggression with peace.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, and
And that's great, that's wonderful.
yeah, yeah, and one of the things that I sort of see in the connection between these two books that I really appreciate is that so many people are in principle dedicated to the kind of global change that His Holiness is representing, but it's easy to kind of leap to that like larger kind of global goal and sort of sidestep the immediate relational
Right.
conflict.
That's right.
And if you don't heal those, really, how are you going to be able to be present for that global situation?
Right.
And so it's sort of like coming to peace is, okay, let's check in, not just with, my conflict as it's manifesting internally. Of course, it's about that, but it's easy to just sort of like focus in on yourself and not allow for, make space for how that personal conflict is hashing out in your interpersonal relationships.
Mhm.
And you learn so much about yourself, right, from these interpersonal structures and,
Right.
and the hierarchies that we allow to develop or we cultivate within the relationships that we have.
Mhm.
And so to me, it's almost like coming to peace is coming to peace leads to a personal. I know we're like little kids. And
I know.
coming to peace is the kind of it's the personal orgasm that then leads to the global orgasm.
That's
right,
The man of
all
peace.
right.
That's right, where everybody gives it up. And everybody gives it up and merges. That's correct.
So
Correct.
to kind of move on to our. Oh, we're doing it. We're doing a picture now. Great. Peace. So for our final kind of departing words, I'd love to kind of have just from both of you, a general thoughts on peace in our current situation. You've been talking a lot about, in references to our dear president. I almost said dear departed president, but we're not so lucky. Our current president. So this current situation, which most people feel is the opposite of peaceful. And you mentioned today, actually, in some Shamans and Siddhas, quite rightly, that we're constantly, turning on our media and seeing panic mode everywhere. I mean, and of course the media culture thrives on that, right? Because it sells to keep the level of friction at a high,
Sure.
to represent the situation in that kind of very hyper intense way. So with all of that happening, with all of the messages saying we're not at peace, we're not at peace, we're not at peace, what is the message for coming from these two books or these two books together to that situation?
Well, one thing that I think of when I hear it, I don't know, do you want to respond to that?
You go.
So one thing I think of when I hear that is Václav Havel was a great inspiration to me and I think to the world. And one of the things that he said about the success of the Velvet Revolution, which eliminated the Soviets all over Eastern Europe without any much. There was a few demonstrations and things, but no war, no violence. One of the things that he said in his own setting of that in Czechoslovakia was that at a certain point, the resistance movement there just did what they wanted to do within whether it was in a jail cell. They did what they wanted to do that they thought was beautiful, and they worked toward beauty, and they simply didn't consider the existence of the oppressive structure on top of them, and they just made life happen as long as it lasted, without even considering it. In other words, they didn't pose themselves always as freaking out about this thing and fighting it. They just went ahead and be themselves, kind of thing, and then therefore found the energy of the positive energy of life, you know.
Yeah.
So my version of that at this moment that came upon me like last week, 2 weeks ago, when Hillary wrote her book, when I have not read yet, but I read an article about her and the writing of it, and then I saw all the reaction and I've been bothered over months by this reaction among different so-called liberals.
Yeah.
Oh, she's a bad, oh, thank goodness we're rid of her. Oh, she's a bad campaigner. Oh, it's all her fault. Oh, she should have won. All this kind of thing, you know. It was hers to lose. She won. Actually, she did win. Our people as a whole, majority, doesn't want this insanity. She won. They stole hundreds of thousands of votes and suppressed them in the states that were won by a small margin by these crazy people. And so as a whole, the nation rejected the crazy ones,
Yeah.
in spite of all the media pumping and all of the fuss paid billions of dollars of free advertising basically to them. And she did win, and she did her best. Of course, she's not perfect, you know, and but she won, A. And then B, I admire the fact that at first she said, okay, yeah, it's not rigged, I accept it, yeah, okay, it's yours. Like, she didn't complain she was cheated, like she should have in one way, maybe. Yeah. But anyway, she didn't at first. She followed the system, and that like Gore did. Okay, he was the vice president, right? So he was the chair of the joint session of Congress that approved his loss in 2000, even though he won, and was stolen by Baker and the Supreme Court creeps and the brown shirts they shipped in from Texas to prevent Dade County from counting the votes and so on. Gore was cheated. And we had a criminal, basically, agenda. I don't blame poor Georgie Porgy as much as Cheney, Darth Cheney, and Rumsfeld. George is just like a party, you know, he's a playboy.
Party
he's
boy.
Happy, looking for weapons under the table. You know, I mean, he's just a funny guy. And he was exploited by the nasty Darth Cheney and that people. And so I blame them more than him. But the point is, you put a criminal in top of this powerful machine, which was designed for last century, this military machine and communication machine, and then they will damage the planet, for sure. And they did. And then Gore was on the system. I can't say anything, but he did the environment. That's nice. But they were wrecking the environment while he was alerting people about it.
Yeah.
They were continuing to wreck it, which he wouldn't have done. He wouldn't have invaded Iraq. We're not that bad, our country, at this point, you know. That the second time this happens, but now she is saying in this book, I understand, that this is a clear and present danger, and this is she has to speak up. It's her duty. Even she can't just sit there and say, "Oh, I don't want to be said to be a sore loser. I'm going to go away and be quiet." No, she's saying this is no good. This is wrong. She's using her knowledge. She was State Department for a long time. She's using her knowledge to show what's wrong, and I admire that. And I think we have to, and the liberal people should really get off it, and they should say, okay, we have a mom for president. We have our own Angela Merkel with her imperfections. She's a little here, they got a little payment over there. Her husband is like really creeping around under the and behind every closet.
And he loves balloons.
He's in every closet here. But the point is, he probably damaged her campaign, I feel, by not letting her, but I don't know, I have no knowledge of that, but sort of psychologically, I feel she might have taken advice of somebody saying, look, you had 13 million votes, Bernie has 10 million. In the old days, that makes him automatic vice president. And then you have to negotiate your differences in that setting. But, you know, he works with you, just neck and neck.
Yeah.
That's in the old days. There's no question. You don't go find some guy, some jolly guy in Virginia who's been out there chasing, going on the hunt in Middlebury and jumping over fences on his horse because he's cute. You don't do that because he brings nothing to it.
Yeah.
You bring in the guy who got 10 million, who was your runner-up.
They would have been such a force.
You know,
Yeah.
But not Bill. No, Bill wouldn't like. He was annoyed. Oh, Bernie, husband. Bill wouldn't like that. He wouldn't do that.
That was from Bill?
No, I don't know that. Just saying, he's the ego,
Yeah.
And she's a woman. And they also have ego, but they're a little smarter about connecting with things than the men will be. They do. They won't hold grudges, and they a little bit like that. And so she is president, and we have a mom. We elected one. You guys in California are way ahead. You couldn't be cheated as much as they cheated in the Middle East with those Republican governors there, those Koch-funded Republican governors and legislatures. And so we are still in a sane place. And there's just this incredible fuss going on, which is promising to just wreck us all the time. But you know what? They can do what they like. We are in a sane place. We have a nice female president in exile. You know, they have that in other countries. The Tibetans have the Dalai Lama in exile. We have Hillary in Westchester in exile. And she's speaking up, and that's good. We have a shadow government, and they're speaking up, and that's good. We'll lose a lot until we can get then if we do that, we'll stay unified. We'll get the House back in 2018, and we'll block a lot of their destructiveness, and the New Deal will live on, no problem. So that's so in other words, the whole real biggest problem internally, peace coming internally and externally, is the wrong belief that it's not possible to achieve.
Yeah.
You know, I know someone who's a big shot in some of these environmental groups, high level ones, lots of money. And she told me that the presentations they had in their board meeting from scientists, and then the fact that almost all the other board members came in private planes, they didn't come commercial airline, and that really, although they're still putting a lot, and they should, and they're putting a lot of money and effort into trying to save this and that, they all basically believe it's too late and they will not be able to. They all feel you can't stop this global warming. We're going to have a trash planet, and how are we going to adapt? They feel that we can't stop the machine. They all feel that. And everybody thinks you can't get a good president. You can't. Those spoiler candidates, Nader, they're all equally bad. Then if people don't think it can be peace, then that will be self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
And that's the real danger of the materialist culture and the authoritarian cultures that are still prevalent on the planet. 2,500 years after Buddha, Jesus, Zoroaster, Confucius, Lao Tzu, all these people told us, talk to each other, learn, be civilized, be a gentleman, Confucius said. Be nice, But the first emperor of China burned all his books. But then the second dynasty dug them back up.
Yeah.
And tried to implement them, So
the number one issue you see is that people are no longer believing in peace.
But they can imagine it.
Yeah.
I think that they have to
some
imagine
can't
it.
imagine. Yeah.
They have to try to
learn
imagine
how to
it.
imagine it.
To imagine it in order for it to become true.
That's right.
One of the things that I'd like to say in response to your question, is what are my last thoughts about peace? One thing that and this was what Bob was saying this morning.
Last thoughts.
My last thoughts.
Last
My dying thoughts. My last thoughts, and this is what Bob spoke to this morning in the Shamans and Siddhas class that we taught, which is that it's important to remember that at the heart of our being is peace. It's our Buddha nature.
Yeah.
It's the part of us that is connected in an unbroken way to compassion, to goodness, to kindness. And it's our responsibility to discover that within ourselves. It's our responsibility to do whatever work we have to do on a personal level to be able to resolve the obstacles that keep us from being connected to that place. And this is what coming to peace is all about. It's what my work is all about. And I think, Bob, you have this much more global view, and I have a very personal view. And I think that they both are very important.
They have to be connected.
And they're totally connected. And so I think, if I had any parting message, it would be, spend the time that you need to spend to know yourself, to discover the part of yourself that knows peace, that knows wisdom, that knows compassion, because it does exist. And if you have to imagine that it exists to begin with, then imagine it.
That's really good. I really like that. There is another thing that helps that too. It's like the difference between the bodhisattva practice and the individual vehicle practice. Both are doing the same thing of looking in themselves to discover their nature, mindfulness and meditation and so on. But the bodhisattva one, the motive in doing it is in doing their internal transformation. That's part of the external transformation. So they're doing it for all beings.
Right.
It's like the runner, the marathon runner, the famous Greek marathon runner, who ran to the Athenians to warn them about the Persians invading, and then collapsed and died even because he went past the ability of his body, because he was doing it for the whole community. rather than someone who's just running for their own ego. You know, it's like it gives you a stronger energy when you know that going into yourself to make peace is part of making peace
Yes,
for everybody
for
else.
everyone.
So your motive is you're doing this for everyone.
You're not
You
being
know?
selfish. A lot of people are afraid to do that inner work of focusing inward because they're afraid they're going to be selfish.
Self-indulgent.
It's
or
so
something.
not
Yeah.
selfish. It's so not selfish to work towards your own enlightenment.
Right.
Because you will naturally seek to help others once you have touched that place within you that that knows peace. You will seek to help others find that peace. It will
That's
be
right.
it will be your driving force.
It will.
That's a beautiful note to end
Yeah,
on.
well, you can turn it off after this.
No, please.
I used to give my students in college, and I will be doing that in a week or so. I think actually next week at my last Columbia class, because I'm retiring.
Your last class,
But-
wow.
Columbia one.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to keep teaching here and there, but not at Columbia. And I give them the Santideva challenge, that all happiness comes from working for the and wishing for the happiness of others, and all suffering comes from wishing your own happiness. And I give them that challenge, and some students are brave enough to really take me up on it, and when they do, it's usually the males, and then they always get to sex, inevitably. These young kids, you know, and then they say, "No, I have really great sex by being selfish." They say. So then my final argument to them is, go see a sex therapist. and I'm joining your girlfriend and asking you to go find a sex therapist if that's the case.
Or read Coming to Peace.
Or read Coming to Peace.
I could have said that now. Okay, next time I'll say that. You don't need to use that. But
You should definitely use
I always get to that.
This is
I
part
always
of the
get to
podcast,
that.
for sure.
I always do, because they always come up with that one. You know,
Yeah.
oh, great sex when I really just out there for myself.
Yeah.
And I say, well, there are these sex therapists, and they'll help you out with that. And you see, they'll show you that Shantideva is correct, actually.
Yeah.
You have to give it up, you know.
Oh, and they probably
To
haven't had
get
enough
it.
sex because
What?
when they have more sex, they'll realize that it's better to be connected to your partner.
I think so.
In general.
Yeah, it's general. All right, so maybe just as a final closing, we talked way more about orgasms than I anticipated. But where can people find out more? Obviously, Bob, you have a website. Is it Robert Thurman?
BobThurman.com.
BobThurman.com. So people
Right.
can go there to find all your books and where you're going to be at. Do you update with workshops and stuff like that on the website?
Not as well as we should, because I lack assistance sometimes.
Oh, we need to get you some
But I
assistance.
need to get that better done. But I think to some extent, yes.
Okay, great. So BobThurman.com and sacredstream.org.
.org.
Is it stream or streams?
Stream.
Sacred Stream. All right.
Sacredstream.org.
It's been such a pleasure talking to both of you. Mama Lisa. It's a real honor to be here at Stand With You, so thanks
It is.
so much. And
The intensity of that plural was really fun.
oh wow.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
That's great.
It's a wrap. It's
Do
a
you
wrap.
know Wilhelm Reich, by the way? Did you ever read his work?
I read a little bit of Reich when I was a bit
There's
younger.
one book that you really like.
Yeah.
This is off the record.
Yeah.
You really like this book. It's called The Emotional Play